Hello, welcome to my final math project, looking at the game Lethal Company. Just to give you a little brief description of the game, Lethal Company is a cooperative horror game set hundreds of years in the future, where players act as employees for the company by collecting scrap on various abandoned moons in an effort to stay alive by fulfilling the ever-increasing profit quota. Despite my... nearly 1,000 hours in the game. It's somehow managed to keep my interest since it came out in late 2023, I think it was. I think it's managed to do that by having such a high skill curve, always wanting me to improve and get better at the game, having really interesting lore. Honestly, even if you don't have any interest in playing the game, it is if you like cosmic horror, you'll like the game, or you'll like the lore, rather. And most importantly, for today's purposes, the fascinating ways that it uses math to enhance the player experience. During my brainstorming for this project, I struggled a bit, honestly, to find... Oh, and there's my cat. Hi, Daisy. Figure out what questions I wanted to answer, as I not only, already have a lot of knowledge of the game for playing it for so long, but I also wanted to, cover a decent chunk of the game, also connecting all of those different bits into one greater point without it feeling really disconnected. As I thought more and more about it, I realized just how many things in this game rely on probability. It's one of the major reasons I still play the game. There are so many different things that have the chance of occurring that, keep the gameplay fresh. The game's, well renowned for the randomly generated interiors. So every single day, the layout is not the same and you have to basically explore a brand new dungeon every single time. You're really making this a lot more difficult. Cat. There's the differences in enemy spawns and scrap spawns, the types of interiors, different kinds of weather. There's so many different things that have different probabilities of happening. So I thought, well, it's not the most practical question of all time. I thought, what's the rarest day that you can have in Lethal Company? And that's what I'm going to try and solve. There's lots of tiny little sub-questions we're going to solve along the way to get there, but I'll explain them as we go. There will be a whole lot of numbers floating around, but I will attempt to keep this as comprehensible as possible. First, let me provide a little bit more context into what I actually mean by this question, if you're not familiar with the game. In Lethal Company, the goal, as stated previously, is to fulfill a profit quota. You're given 3 days to collect enough scrap to fulfill the quota. Upon starting a given day, there are many things that are immediately dictated before you can even land, as well as things that can happen throughout the day. This question is only concerning the probabilities of events occurring immediately upon starting a day for the sake of a reasonable scope for this project, because the way that the probabilities work for everything that can happen during a day, just so much more complicated than anything we've even covered. So not gonna do that. We're just gonna pretend that doesn't exist for this. Okay, let's start with our first thing. At the beginning of every day, a variety of scrap spawns that you can collect. The exact kinds of scrap and number of scrap depend on the moon that you're landed on. On screen now is the table of the different moons and both the minimum scrap and the maximum scrap that each one can spawn, with Vow being able to spawn 12 to 14, for example, and Titan spawning 28 to 31. There's a lot of other values and things on here, and I'll get to some of them today, but some of them, like the night power and indoor power, are outside the scope of this project. But back to scrap. For the rarest scenario, we need to pick the moon that has the singular rarest item spawn chance across every moon. Every moon has a probability distribution of the various types of scrap that can spawn, and we got to figure out which one has the singular most rare item. After scouring every probability distribution for all the moons, I found that the absolute rarest item, or at least probable item, is Z-Dog on Artifice, with a 0.07% chance of spawning, per scrap item, anyway. I think this scrap is the rarest because it's based off of the game's composer, so it's basically an Easter egg. No, not that one. Anyway, that spawn probability actually doesn't matter at all, because what I'm about to explain makes that number a moot point. SIDS, which is not sudden infant death syndrome, want to make that very clear, or SIDs, or it stands for single item days. They're a relatively new addition to the game, where occasionally, more specifically a 5.2% chance of occurring on any day, every item that day will be the exact same type of scrap. So if, a moon can spawn a blow dryer and a big bolt and a metal sheet or whatever, that day will just have metal sheets everywhere, or, something of that nature. However, if that 5.2% chance of a single item day occurs, the item chosen is based on an entirely separate system. So just because ZDog is 0.07%, that doesn't mean it's 0.07% of the ZDog being the single item day, because why would it be that simple? The details of how this separate system works are honestly unnecessary for this project, but the main important thing is that every possible item that can spawn has an equal chance of being chosen, except the Z-Dog. I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, if there's 10 possible different scrap items that can spawn, regardless of what their chances of spawning are, for a single item day, they all have an equal chance to be chosen. Now, the Z-Dog is unique in that it's pretty universally rare on any moon, and because of this separate system, again, not going to go too far into it, but the Z-Dog is considered a rare item, not because of its probability, just because it's rare. I don't know. That makes it special. And special in what way? Well, oh wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just figure out the probability of a Z-Dog being chosen as the single item day before we get into this special system nonsense. On screen now is the loot table for Artifice, the moon we're currently on, in case you forgot. Now, again, lots of information here, but the only thing we need to care about is the total number of unique scrap types, which I'm not going to make you count all of them. There's 43. There's a lot. In fact, I think this moon has the most potential different kinds of scrap in the game, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But with 43 items and every single item being an equal chance to be chosen as the single item day, it's just a 1 in 43 chance, or in percentage, it's about a 2.326% chance, which is pretty low. However, as I mentioned, the Z-Dog is special and weird, so if the Z-Dog is picked with that 2.3% chance, the item is re-rolled to pick a different item for the single item day. So, in this theoretical scenario, what if Z-Dog gets chosen a second time in a row? It re-rolls it again. For some reason, there's a special tier of items that it re-rolls and tries to get a different one for. Anyway, the system is designed to re-roll twice. So, if it chooses Z-Dog, it'll re-roll. If we choose it Z-Dog again, re-roll again. When it chooses Z-Dog for the third time, it still is not an item it wants to be the single item day. So at this point, there's just a 60% chance of the single item day failing outright together and not happening at all. But if it gets past all of those hurdles, we have our single item day of Z-Dogs. So, to recap, in order to get a single item day of a Z-Dog on Artifice, and for it to be the chosen scrap 3 times, as per the single item day requirements, it is a 5.2% chance, followed by a 2.326% chance, followed by a 2.326% chance, followed by a 2.326% chance, followed by a 40% chance, because there's a 60% chance of it failing, but we want it to succeed. So to get our probability, we can just use the product rule, simply multiplying each probability with each other, which gives us the probability of Z-Dog single item day is equal to 0.052 times 0.02326 to the power of 3 times 0.4, which equals that number, or roughly a 0.0000262% chance, which is pretty rare. That is pretty unlikely to happen. Now, if you think that is a low probability, okay, well, you're right, but that was just the appetizer. That was just the scrap. Now, let's talk about some other mechanics, like what kind of interior this day will have. As of making this project, the company has 3 unique interiors: factory, mansion, and mineshaft. Every moon also has a probability distribution to decide which of these 3 will be chosen. Artifice's looks like this, with a 14.95% chance of being factory, a 35.28% chance of being mansion, and a 49.77% chance of being mineshaft. Obviously, we're going to choose the rarest of the 3, which would be factory. So let's add that to the list of our many probabilities. It's like we're grocery shopping for probabilities. Anyway, probability of Z-Dog single item day and it being a factory interior is a 0.0000262% times 14.95%, which gives us 0.0000392%. Hey, That's another 0 on there. That's cool. Okay, next mechanic. Meteor showers. Now this is one that, depending on who's watching this, you might already be familiar with. This was actually a question on a previous worksheet in the class, so I don't have much to explain here because the question answered it pretty well. Every day, there's a 0.6% chance of a meteor shower occurring. Just, you know, as you do. Let's add that to the pile. So the probability of Z-Dog single item day and a factory interior and a meteor shower occurring is 0.000000392% times 0.6%, which is 0.000000235% chance of occurring. That's 2 more zeros. We are definitely past the point of this day ever occurring naturally. Next, let's talk about weather. The way this game decides on moons being affected by a particular kind of weather is, as you guessed it, also complicated. On screen now is how it's determined. This is just taken from the game's wiki, like all the other tables have been, except that this is out of date, because it says there are only 8 moons in the game, which hasn't been the case since early 2024. For the sake of simplicity, so I don't lose my mind entirely, I will be ignoring how having weather is chosen. That, and because this is technically decided outside of our 1-day parameter anyway, so it doesn't really qualify fully for this. What I will pay attention to is the type of weather, because we can just make a conditional probability here. We can just assume that there is a weather condition for this day. We don't have to figure out the probability of there being a weather condition. We can just assume it's already happened. That's the nice thing about conditional probabilities. There are 5 weather conditions that can happen in the game, outside of the standard just mild weather, which isn't a weather condition, that's just the default. The 5 are as follows: eclipsed, stormy, foggy, flooded, and rainy. Some of these conditions have the possibility of being excluded from the one chosen, depending on whatever moon you're on. I feel like I've said that like 7 times at this point. Rend, for example, can only be eclipsed or stormy. It can never be foggy, flooded, or rainy. The moon just doesn't support those weather types. Here on Artifice, it can be every single weather type except foggy, and every single weather condition has an equal chance of being chosen from the available ones. So while we could theoretically pick any of the 4 remaining weather on Artifice, and it would make no difference, I will specifically be picking eclipsed for a reason I'll explain it shortly. But in probability notation, it would look something like probability of eclipsed, assuming weather condition is 0.25, and adding this probability to our existing pile of probabilities at this point. The probability of Z-Dog single item day with a factory interior and a meteor shower and is eclipsed, assuming there is a weather condition, is our old number times 25% probability, which is 0.00000000588% chance of this day occurring. I might have added an extra 0 in there. Now, why did I go out of my way to pick eclipsed weather? Well, that's because when a moon is eclipsed, the min enemies to spawn variable in the game's code is set to 3 instead of its standard value of 0, at least on Artifice. It changes the number change depending on the moon. I'm not going to go super in depth into how enemy spawning works because that goes into the things that can happen later in the day and not instantly when the day starts. But what this effectively means is that 3 interior-based enemies spawn immediately at the beginning of the day. And you know what that means at this point? That's right, it's another probability distribution. Yay! Is what I would be saying, if not for yet another mechanic that makes this all pointless. Entity infestations have a 2.907% chance of happening on a given day, except if the real world date is October 23rd, in which case it's like 1.5% chance, because that's the game's anniversary. I'm going to ignore that, but a simplified version of what it does is that it turns every enemy that spawns into either a hoarding bug or a nutcracker, depending on the infestation type. It's basically a version of a single item day, but for enemies, a single enemy day, although for some reason it can only happen for hoarding bugs and nutcrackers. There are no infestations for other kinds of enemies. If an entity infestation occurs, there's a 75% chance of it being a hoarding bug infestation and a 25% chance of it being a nutcracker infestation. So, just as we've done many times at this point, we'll pick the rarest option. This makes our new rarest day probability look like this, which is a nightmare to look at. I'm sorry. I'm not going to read the whole thing out anymore because it's getting nightmarishly long. The final number that we now have is 0.0000000042732.9% chance of this day occurring. I don't even know how many zeros we're at anymore. Yeah, there's another obscure random mechanic. Indoor fog is a thing in the game for some reason. It's probably the newest of all of these additions, and controversial addition aside, it is a thing that can happen. And just like everything else, it can happen on any given day. By default, it has a 2% chance of occurring, except if there is also an entity infestation, it is increased to a 20% chance of occurring. Before we go on, I need to decrease... I desperately need to shorten the name of this probability because it's this. This is what it is currently. I'm just gonna not no more of this. We're gonna rename it to just the probability of rarest possible day. Anyway, the probability of the rarest possible day is our old number times 20%, which is okay. I'm gonna speedrun this one. 0.000000000085465 chance of happening. Okay. Legitimately, that is the last thing. This is our final number. All together, this is the complete equation for every single probability that is required for this theoretical rarest possible day to occur, with percentages changed to decimals, by the way. You probably figured that out, but I figured I should mention it. At last, we have our Z-Dog rolled 3 times. Single item day, factory interior, meteor shower, eclipse, assuming a weather condition, nutcracker infestation, indoor fog day. I just remembered that every single time the day starts, a random seed is chosen to determine the interior layout. That number is in the billions. Okay. That's fine. Anyway, finding the rarest possible day might legitimately be a black hole of a solution. I mean, think about it. Even a couple of the things I went over already have cracks in how I went about them that could be exploited for an even smaller chance of this day occurring. Take the first example of the Z-Dog scrap spawn chance, which the actual item itself, when it's not a single item day, was 0.07% chance of spawning per scrap item. I disregarded its base spawn chance in order to talk about single item days, but the single item days chances are actually lower. Even after the triple rolling of the Z-Dog and the single item day roll itself, it is nothing compared to the base 0.07% chance of Z-Dog, even if that happened twice. Because on Artifice, there are 26 to 30 items that can spawn normally. It's around that range. It can kind of go up or down depending on the version you're playing on, what interior, but let's just say that there's 30. That is 0.0007 to the power of 30. Which makes this number, which is legitimately, I think, listen, I'm not a mathematician, but I think the sun will explode before this happens. So, finding the absolute rarest, it's a fun treasure hunt, but there's so many variables in this game that it's kind of hard to keep track of it all and find the definitive, best. Not to mention, and with this insane number from the Z-Dogs, happening 30 times in the same day. Like I said, it could increase even more because if the interior is mineshaft, which we did choose factory, but let's just pretend it's mineshaft for a moment. That interior has a special parameter where it increases the amount of scrap for that day by 6 from whatever the chosen number was. So the standard range is 26 through 30. If it chose 28, 34 items that day. Which would look like this as a function, by the way. The input S is the default scrap value rolled, and then, S plus 6. It's simple, but we like functions here. We're function people. I'm functionally insane. at this point. Nor did I didn't even get a chance to talk about the quadratic function that is the profit quota of the game, which, like, I honestly probably could have made the whole project just about the profit quota. There's so much math in this game. It actually is very surprising to me. Like, I knew there was a lot, but almost every single thing in the game relies on math. If it didn't have these systems, it would crumble apart immediately. But I digress. I really enjoy this game, if that wasn't clear already. And there's so many systems in place to keep this game just so fresh and fun for so long, and it's mostly because of probability. Was this exercise a bit pointless? Maybe. But in trying to answer this question, I learned a lot about the game that I did not know about before, and it was really fascinating. It was really interesting. I had a lot of time. A lot of fun. I had fun time. I don't even know what I was trying to say. I play this game competitively for fun because there's not a, esports scene around Lethal Company. I play competitively very regularly. So learning all this stuff is actually helpful and might help me play better and just, might be the difference between life or death depending on the scenario. I did a lot of research into how entity spawning works that I didn't end up using for this because even ignoring all of the things that can happen later in a day, the scope of this was still way bigger than I wanted it to be, but whatever. It's fine. So, all that said, this has been incredibly enlightening, and I'm really grateful for getting the opportunity to create this project in the first place. This is not something, you get to do as a school project very often. So, I'm going to keep looking for math in games that I play in the future. I think I've always looked for math a little bit, at least in, like, probability, for sure, if it isn't clear by now. I like probability. I've always liked finding, like, rare items in games and things, so... That might be... I might have a gambling problem and not even know it yet. But yeah, I'm going to definitely look out for probability in the future and functions as well. I didn't get to use functions a ton for this project, but they're also very cool. Anyway, I'm reading off of a script I wrote, if you haven't noticed. If my eyes keep looking over here, it's because I wrote absolutely everything down. Not everything. I've been ad-libbing some parts. But I have no idea how long this presentation is because I haven't edited it yet, so I'll end it here. Thank you for watching, and I hope I didn't melt your brain as much as I melted my own researching this project. Yeah. Bye!